I guess one more thing with the MTC, how learned Russian in the MTC, and it's a really hard language compared to, Spanish and French and German we've all known for a little bit longer, and it's more familiar with the English language. But one of the things that I found was really frustrating was the language, how it's very, if you haven't even heard it before, it's very different than what anything like I've been used to. And so just tips for anyone that is learning a different language at the MTC is expect it to be hard and don't expect to know it even by the time you get out, because I think every day I wouldn't say I mastered Russian, but every day I wrestled with it. It was really hard, and I don't think there was ever a time where I felt fully I know Russian where I don't need to study. I always felt I needed to write down new words and to study hard. And so I think a lot of missionaries should know that I wish I knew coming in was you're going to struggle with the language in the MTC, and the best thing is to understand that right from the beginning and just go little by little.
I love the Russian language. Absolutely love Russian. It is an incredible language. English has been changed and modified and has different roots and origins from different languages, and it kind of comes together and you have this mix, and you see that with different words and pronunciations, and that's kind of hard to kind of figure out grammar rules and whatnot, because there's so many different roots, origins, I guess, of the English language. Russian's it's a lot different. In that regard, it comes to Slavic language, and of course it's evolved over the centuries, as all languages do. However, it's kept a lot of the same roots, and that is really cool, because it means that it sticks to its own grammar rules a lot better than English does. So when you learn a rule, generally speaking, that rule will hold regardless of the situation. So now, that being said, Russian grammar is a lot more complex than English grammar. I'll touch on that in a second, I guess. So you have grammar and pronunciation, I think, are the two main facets of a language that are if you can pronounce the language and you understand the grammar, then you're most of the way there of knowing and understanding the language. The pronunciation, excuse me, is not what I would say overly difficult. It's not something like Chinese. It's not tonal, obviously, or at all. So you can pretty much anybody can pronounce it with relative success. That being said, it's very hard to pronounce it like a native, but the point is the pronunciation isn't the roadblock that most foreign speakers have to learning Russian. The roadblock is the grammar. The grammar is by and far the hardest aspect of the language, and that's because they are a case-based language. And what that means is, in English, well, yeah, of course, in English, you conjugate verbs, right? You have different verbs, and based on the tense and based on who's doing the action, the verb will change and the verb will conjugate. And so you have an infinitive, let's say to run, right? I run, he runs, they run, or if talking about past tense, I ran, she ran, he ran, all that. The to run, that infinitive will conjugate to be different, to express a different situation. Well, in Russian, you have that same sort of conjugation system, but it also applies to all nouns, pronouns, adjectives, and it affects the whole sentence. So if you wanted to say, I saw the boy, you would end up modifying not only the to see infinitive to become saw, but you'd also modify boy, and you would change the ending on it. So each ending can change to one of pretty much 24 different options. So you have 6 cases, and each case has a masculine, feminine, and neuter, and plural aspect to it. And so with these 6 cases, you can change the ending of that noun, the ending of the direct object of the sentence, a myriad of different ways. And that makes it extremely complicated, because how you change it matters. The way the ending of that word is changed will tell you the role of that word in the sentence. So I saw the boy, if I change boy to be the direct object, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter if I say I saw the boy. I can say I boy saw. In Russian, that makes perfect sense. The word order stops mattering because excuse me, because you have the the declinations, which is to say the changed endings of the nouns, of the pronouns, of the adjectives modifying the nouns. And it all gets very complex because the natives don't even think about it, and they'll say it in whatever order. Well, so I suppose word order then stops becoming grammatically necessary, but rather content oriented. So natives will say things in different word orders to stress different meanings, to express different emotions, different thoughts. Russian doesn't have a lot of question words, so word order will then be used to signify a question or denote surprise or confirmation or commentary or whatnot. So it gets pretty hairy when you're trying to nail down the minutia of the grammatical principles. So yeah, pretty tough.
So the Russian language is like very difficult technically. There's a lot of grammatical aspects, and it's just not English. Like, you just can't translate it directly. And when you do, people just don't understand you. So it's definitely a hard language to get down just because it's so foreign. It's so different. And like, I still have to think about a lot of things when I'm speaking Russian. And the accent is different as well, just because there are sounds in the Russian language that we just don't have in English, or there are long strings of consonants that really scare people. So it's difficult, but I mean, there are a lot of, like, there's the hard R sound that's also present in like Spanish and some other languages. For example, like the word хорошо means like okay or good or whatever. But I don't know, like when you're learning the language, it's easy to say like хорошо, or I don't know, not saying those consonants correctly. There are little signs that you put after some of the letters. There's like a soft sign and a hard sign, and so sometimes missionaries struggle pronouncing those. I still struggle myself pronouncing those, but sometimes the members can't understand us because we don't pronounce their letters correctly. Or there's a letter that's like a sh sound, but there's a sh and there's a sh. And if you don't say it correctly, then sometimes they can get on your case. But I think they're generally very forgiving because they understand that we are learning a very difficult language. And the people are always very impressed hearing us speak Russian and knowing that we never took it in like formal schooling and that we just sort of picked it up there. They're always very impressed. The word for hello is a lot more complicated than you think it is. It's здравствуйте. And that's, I mean, I'm not obviously saying it perfectly, but it's здравствуйте. But I think sometimes people or missionaries struggle getting that word down. Obviously in the MTC, it's just like здравствуйте. I don't know, we are a little bit lazy about pronouncing all of the letters in it. Or the word for please is пожалуйста, but a lot of missionaries sort of butcher that at the beginning, just пожалуйста or пожалуйста. I don't know. It's a beautiful language. I thought at first that it was going to be sort of sounding like people shouting, or I just thought it was a lot of zh and ch sounds, but it just is so gorgeous once you understand it and you understand that it's such a rich language that can describe things in so many different ways. At the beginning of my mission, just to learn things, I just had like a whiteboard and I would write phrases out just during language study. I would write it out and erase it and write it out and erase it and practice it, and I would talk to myself out loud. I would talk to my companion out loud. I would ask people questions all the time. And then toward the end of my mission, when I was understanding well, I was speaking well, I would just read from the scriptures out loud for like an hour straight, or I'd read from the Liahona for like an hour straight, just because I wanted to get the rhythm down. I wanted to improve my accent. I wanted to improve my reading comprehension skills. And so it sort of depends on what is your learning strategy. But for me, that's what worked.
Some people say that, oh, Russian's a really hard language to learn. And I think any language is really hard to learn. But if you take the time to really work at it in the beginning, Russian is a language that's easy to master. English has a lot of exceptions, and there's a lot of funny things about English that are hard to make it so it's hard for, people who are learning English as a second language to know it really well. But Russian, you can learn really well because there's rules that are very strict, and there's a lot of rules that are followed most of the time. And so I think Russian is cool in that respect, that once you have really worked hard in the beginning, that it's not very difficult to become a very fluent speaker. One of the first times where I was hit really hard with the need to learn the language quickly, it was my first transfer, and I was on an exchange with an elder from Ukraine, Elder Shevchenko, and he and I were in the MTC together, and we had a lot of fun. He was a great guy, but he didn't know English very well, and I didn't know Russian very well. And so communicating was a lot of fun, and making dinners and being out on the street. And I remember being out on the street one time with him when we were on exchanges and just talking to people. And, he led the conversations mostly because he knew Russian really well and I didn't. And I remember talking to one man, and he would look at me and ask me questions, and I didn't know how to answer him. And I kept looking to Elder Shevchenko, and I said, I don't know what he's saying. What's he saying? Help me out. And he kept using these words that I didn't know, like vaina, and that was war. And he was asking me all these questions about World War II and different beliefs that we had, and all the politics of it. And I just couldn't talk to him. I didn't know how to answer or what to say. And I remember going home that night, really humbled. Speaking a second language can be very humbling, I'm sure, as many people have experienced. But I was really humbled, and I knew that I needed to learn the language a lot better. And that really helped me a lot and gave me a great desire, because I knew that I couldn't be an instrument or a tool in the hands of our Savior if I didn't work hard. I knew that I would be blessed, and I knew that He would help me beyond what I could do on my own, but I knew that I needed to put in the effort. And so that was a really good experience for me to have in my first few weeks in Russia.
As far as learning, people are going to know you're American right off the bat if you are American. And it is very hard. Very few missionaries actually get to the point where they can speak well enough that Russians don't know that they're Americans, to disguise their accent. You always will have an accent, or your grammar, or just the way you even form sentence structures. A Russian will be able to tell. And so, I don't know, I wouldn't worry too much about trying to perfect the language, but just really trying to express yourself, because they're very expressive people. They love poetry. I can't tell you how many times I had somebody write me a poem, and they really appreciate beauty. But one cool thing about Russians is they love to help. They love to help you. And they also love to correct you, so don't be offended if they correct you too much. They're just a very, things should be right. This is the way things should be. But so many times when I was sitting on a bus or something and I had a language question, I just ask the person next to me and be like, hey, how do you say this? Or I didn't understand what that meant. And they would, it was a great kind of entryway to just get talking to them and asking them about it. They love helping with language. The members are so understanding, and will also help you out. And even if it's what seems to you the poorest explanation of the first vision or something you could have said in Russian, it'll be okay. I think universally for all missions, that the language of the Spirit transcends whatever language might be coming out of your mouth. So if you really work on just trying to express yourself, saying things that you would actually say, working on that will help you the most in being able to communicate, not just speak the language, but really communicate with people. It is a super hard language, and the grammar is a beast. And that's kind of part of why I'm majoring in it, is so I can just say, hey, you know what? I did master Russian. It didn't beat me. But yeah, just kind of keep working at it. if you just don't give up and just keep working on the language every day, you will get to a point where you can express yourself freely. I've talked to a lot of missionaries, and they said usually about like 3 months into the mission, they felt fairly comfortable with being able to, you know, get groceries, and like, as far as like language, you kind of feel like you can get around. You can at least communicate what you need, like as far as like basic needs. 3 months, usually you feel pretty comfortable, and you feel like, okay, I've got my feet on the ground, like I can kind of make my way around. This should be fine. So, yeah.
A lot of people talk about how Russian is a very difficult language. You'll hear that as you're starting out, and you'll hear it in the MTC, and you'll probably feel it in the MTC. A lot of it comes from trying to eat the elephant in one bite. I promise you that it's a lot simpler than it worries you to be. Russian, there's one main grammatical principle that it doesn't share with English, and that's casing. And once you understand how cases work, you will be able to understand most of what is being said around you. And you'll be able to get yourself across. It will be hard, your vocabulary will still be weak, your grammar might not be perfect. But once you understand cases, you'll be able to be comfortable in understanding what's being said around you. Don't overstress the language. Read the Book of Mormon, especially this new translation that has come out. It's very well done. You'll be able to feel confident and comfortable. One of the best things that I ever did was buy the animated stories of the Book of Mormon in Russian. It helped me learn tremendously because it was not using old language, it was using contemporary language, and it was talking about things that I would do, you know, build a boat, teach the gospel, chop off arms, something like that. They may not have always been perfect vocabulary lessons, but they were always good for teaching me how people would talk. It's a very simple thing, and you don't need to worry so much. Time and time again, people worry most about the language I've seen when it's just a matter of time. There will be a day when you'll go to sleep, you'll have a dream in Russian, you'll wake up, and you'll think, I did it. Don't worry until that day. Just focus on teaching the gospel, and the Lord will make up the rest.
So I love Russian. I decided to major in Russian after I got home. And it's just such a rich language. That's what Russians always say. The bogati язык. It's a rich language. And you're just like, yeah, sure, whatever that means, but it is. English has all sorts of exceptions to rules, and it doesn't really make sense half the time. Russian always makes sense. It's got just roots with prefixes and suffixes, and it's almost like a game. It's like a puzzle, figuring out how to say stuff. Word order doesn't matter. Like, that's how you determine stuff in English. You got subject, verb, direct object, indirect object, everything. Russian word order, you can mix all the words up. It'll mean the same thing because you change the word itself. So for example, I'll say, all right, I love you. Я люблю тебя. That's I love you. So ya is the subject form of I. Тебя is the direct object form of you. The normal form is ты, that's you, but тебя if you're being acted on. And люблю is the first person singular conjugation of любить, which is to love. Now, since all those words are their own specific version of that word, I could say тебя я люблю, which is you I love, and it still makes sense because you know that I'm the one doing the loving because of the way the verb is, you're the one being acted on because of the way тебя instead of ты. So it's really a beautiful language that you can just control and manipulate. As soon as you understand the grammar, you can own it, just master it. And it was always really fun on the mission because you might know a verb for something and you want to say like the noun version of the verb, and you just kind of guess. You know, it's like водить is to drive, and you're like водитель or driver, and they're like, okay, and you're like, is that a word? And they're like, yeah, and you're like, I just made a word. And you know, it makes sense. It's a beautiful language. So there are a lot of missionaries who study a lot of vocabulary, and they kind of master vocabulary, and using a lot of vocabulary they can talk to people. Personally, I loved the grammar a lot more. I delved into it and tried to understand it so I could just manipulate words. And I didn't study vocabulary as much, but since I knew the grammar, I could create words from the words I already knew and sort of own the language that way. So I'd say find whatever works for you, whatever you like. If you can memorize vocabulary super easy, go for vocabulary. But if you want to just totally understand how the language works, I'd say delve into the grammar and figure out how that works. And I mean, there's not really a right way to learn a language. It's all about you. But I know I personally, I love the grammar. Now I talk to missionaries who study vocabulary. I'm like, yeah, you know a lot of words, but you're not quite using them right. But Russians don't really seem to care either way, because I mean, the Spirit's the one that talks to them anyways. So no matter how well that you understand the language and master it, if you teach with the Spirit and do the best you can, then it'll all work out. They'll feel what they need to feel.